Welcome everyone. We are so excited to be here. Thank you for coming to join us this cold December day here in Seattle, Washington. We have when I say amazing, I don't think you really understand how amazing this panel is today. Just in case you thought you were joining a horticultural talk, let me remind you that you are at Unlearning. And today the topic is Unlearning Media Illiteracy. But first, hey, there are captions here on our Zoom screen that if it would benefit you, we want you to take advantage of. If you just look for me on my Zoom screen, it's kind of down here. There's a little CC button for closed captions. You can turn that on and you can even display it in different languages. Oh my God, technology, just be teching out. We have live ASL interpretation. Please let us know at any time if for some reason you are having trouble accessing that. Please reach out to the LTHJ Global team in the background who is always here to make sure that your experience is top tier, top shelf for you, baby. Hey, community guidelines, if you haven't read them, please take a moment to do that. Our Unlearning community is a growing, thriving national and even international community, and the way that we engage with one another is as important as the conversations that we are having. So check out those community guidelines either today. Well, don't do it while we're talking. That would actually go against the guidelines. So check it out later today when you have a moment. We are recording. We're recording because this is live TV, baby. But unfortunately, you're not on the recording. So that means that you can come onto camera. I want to see what you're wearing. I want to see in your house. I want to see like a lover walk around in the background. Do whatever is going to make you feel comfortable to be fully present with us here. As always, we love your reflections. Please take a moment to fill out our survey. Afterwards, we are already planning for our 2025 calendar. It looks amazing, but we want to make sure the topics that you want to cover are on that calendar. So leave us some feedback before you go today. Our ASL interpretation is provided by Pro Bono ASL because they make the revolution accessible. If you are thinking about having an online event, an in-person event, even a family event this holiday season, and you're looking for an ASL partner, please check out our friends over at Pro Bono ASL because the future is going to be accessible. Hey, let's take a breath together. Oh, let's find our way fully here. Deep inhale in and deep exhale out. Let's meet this panel. Oh my goodness. If we were getting awards just for having the best looking panels every time, we would Emmy every time. I haven't been told that is an award that's available yet, but I'm thinking of starting a trend. Welcome to the panel, Amity Adarizi. She is an Emmy award-winning journalist who has been in a TV studio since she learned to walk. She's been called an expert in connection, uniting people through shared and often humorous experiences. Her life and career began in her hometown of Los Angeles, where she studied literature as well as geology at UCLA and worked for the Dr. Phil Show and Access Hollywood. Switching from celebrities to politics and government, Amity spent nearly 2 decades as a TV news anchor, medical health journalist, and the host of NBC Seattle's New Day Northwest. She joined the Allen Institute in September of 2024. As a senior communications and media relations specialist, her mission is to explore new and creative ideas that highlight the incredible work being done at the Institute every day. Amity, it is such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Oh my God, I'm thinking back to when we first met and I was so nervous. I was like, I see this person on TV when I'm like feeding my children, and now I'm going to go meet her. I just want to start with this big question. If you can help us set the stage, what is media literacy? Because if we're talking about media illiteracy, what does it mean to be media literate?
This question just for me right now?
That's for you, you know.
Okay. I believe this question really has actually changed a lot over time as technology has changed. But to me, media literacy means really knowing what you're doing and having the ability and the skills to identify things that may not be exactly biased or non-biased. And I think it might also be helping others to identify when things are maybe not so easy to tell. For example,
Mhm.
my grandmother reading an article the other day, and I said, look, you can tell there's a few things in here that give you an idea that maybe this isn't, an accredited source to get your news from. So I think media literacy is being able to identify things or topics or ideas that stray from what media should be, which is to educate.
Oh, oh, oh. Talk is done today. It should be to, I'm, I'm not sure we're all aligned on that idea. Let's meet some of these other panelists. Welcome to the virtual stage, Angela Poe Russell, a veteran TV journalist and storyteller known for her in-depth reporting and compelling interviews. Most recently, she co-hosted the award-winning television shows Evening and Take 5 on King 5 in Seattle, but her career has taken her all over the country, from the Deep South to the Northeast. Angela's work in TV news earned her a National Gracie Award and previously a Northwest Emmy Award. She has spent the last decade expanding the reach of her storytelling through diverse mediums, including film. Currently, Angela is a playwright in residence at Seattle Public Theater. I'm stumbling over my words because I'm like, who are these amazing people on the panel? Where she is busy developing a new musical. She is also a contributing host for KIRO News Radio. Together with her husband, Victor, they have 4 children. Angela, welcome to the virtual stage.
Hi, Lindsey. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. Some of you also probably follow Angela around for all of the charitable work that she is doing, helping to raise our philanthropic paddles at various organizations. Let's just expand. So, I mean, this idea that we can look to media to educate, has that shifted in the span of your career? I feel like today, now the goal is to entertain.
Hmm.
The goal is to, at the end of the day, when I loved Amity's definition, and when I looked at headlining it, it's really about being able to consume responsibly. And then I love the part she added about being able to help other people. The reality is, when Amity and I, and Amity, I don't know your exact age, so I'll speak for me. But back when I first started in television, I remember there were only a handful of places where you could get news. There were only a handful of channels. This was, at the dawn of the internet, when email was just happening. Yes, I go that far back.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, the number of channels, the number of places that you can go to get information, we had to be better storytellers to get your attention. Now, if I have to put, something special in my vegetables to make it palatable to you so that you'll watch, I think it's worth it. So I would say, number one, because we have so many more places where people can go. We have podcasts now, social media. We have, the numerous channels. So many different tentacles, right, for information. And so the places where they have invested in people who are verifying information, who are actually digging to get to the truth, they have to compete for those dollars. So the question is, has it changed over time? Absolutely. And unfortunately, it's not just, it's educating, but we're having to spend a lot more time just verifying and being able to counter the different claims that people are making. Tegna, where, Amity and I worked, they started the verify segment where they just had to verify all these claims. You can make a living just off of verifying all the claims.
Wow. Wow. This is Lindsey. Oh my goodness. Everybody out in the audience, you can see the conversation that we're going to get into today. Let's welcome up today Jared Van. PCBA is currently a PhD candidate at the Pennsylvania State University under the supervision of Dr. Richard M. Kubina Jr. in the Special Education Department. He received his MS in Applied Behavior Analysis at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Jared worked as a behavior interventionist in the California Bay Area and greater Los Angeles area for over half a decade, working with a diverse population of clients with autism and other developmental disabilities. Jared's research interests are in the areas of precision teaching, behavior science, instructional design, social justice, education, special education, and education policy. Jared, welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay. Oh, this is Jared. Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay.
This is Lindsay. Jared, you really have been focusing a lot on the ways that this intersects with social media. You know, Amity and Angela have really been front and center on our news stations every day, and you've been really looking at the ways that social media then has its own responsibility. How is that similar or different?
This is Jared. That's a very interesting question, and I like it a lot. I recognized early on during my academic career that a lot of times when we write articles for publication, there are a lot of barriers for entry for individuals that are not in academia to be able to consume the content. One, it's written in academic jargon, which is even problematic for scientists and other academics. Two, there's a barrier of cost because not all the articles are free to access. And then three, sometimes it ends up so that the individuals that are providing the information end up just speaking to the choir, so it doesn't actually reach the people who need it. So I noticed a gap in not just the literature, but the media literature, perhaps, where there wasn't enough people talking about things such as Black history, such as special education, disabilities, precision teaching, all of these things that I thought, hey, I'm learning something that I feel like everybody should know every day. I think that I can share it with others. And I've learned also that it's insufficient to simply tell people, go do your research. Because one, not only are people not trained how to do research, but two, simply trying to quote unquote Google something won't always end up being true or accurate or factual. The most important information may not rise to the top of your search results. And then three, um, people need help, especially today. The illiteracy rate is extremely high. It's almost at about 50% that people who can't read at a sixth grade level, which is considered illiterate. So we need to make sure that we're not just telling people, hey, do your own research. We need to help them find ways and teach them how to do their own research so that they can be able to then take the reins and do it themselves.
Wow, wow. This is Lindsay. This is Lindsay. I mean, you're bringing up for me. I remember my grandmother, her family is from Barbados. And I remember being there as a young person and, you know, in my little like young America, so great. And somebody said to me, you know, he spent most of his days working on a boat. And I was like, oh, you know, America. And he was like, we have a 98% literacy rate here. You have something like a 30% literacy rate. And it was oh my God, right? Like all these things that I do not know that I need to know about this country. But this is interesting. Oh, go ahead, Angela.
Oh, I was okay. I don't know if I should raise my hand or just
No,
jump
get in
in.
there.
I just wanted to, okay, this is Angela speaking, and I just wanted to ask you all a question since we're on this, you know, media literacy piece. My feeling, and I've been preaching this like to my friend circle, I feel like one of the number one thing we need to do to kind of change how things are going right now with like misinformation, disinformation, all the things, is we need a really good media literacy curriculum in all schools, period. And the way that we have done government, civics, like all the things, it has to be the thing we prioritize. I'm not sure what programs are out there or curriculum, but if I'm the one in charge, I'd be like, that needs to happen yesterday so that, Jared, to your point, when we said go do your research, more young people know what that could look like.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Do you think that there is a active attempt to avoid that type of literacy in our culture, in our schools?
This is Amity. And I would, oh, I'm sorry, Jared. I would say that's such a great question, Lindsey, because I think it depends on, I mean, it really depends on where the education is being provided. So I wrote down what Angela said because I'm going to bring it to Seattle Public Schools and see if this is something that we can get into our district curriculum. I know my children's teachers have kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's different, right? It's different than I remember being in middle school, and we had a subscription to Time magazine, or not Time, it was Newsweek. It was Newsweek magazine, which I don't even know if it's still in print anymore. But that's how we would talk about media and news, is we would go through Newsweek. That doesn't exist anymore. So I think that's a really good point, is that we need to be pushing for that curriculum in schools. But again, that question of how is it going to be managed across the country and in different districts?
Yeah. This is Lindsey. Go ahead, Jared.
This is Jared. That is a great point. We do need those curriculum. Um, One important factor that not a lot of people attend to, because if you're not trained, how could you know? Just because the curriculum is out there doesn't mean that it has important factors embedded in it for its instructional design, such as direct instruction. We need to determine whether or not our learners are meeting the goals at each level. So we need to measure their learning across time. So how are we measuring that? Precision teaching is what I believe is the best way to do so. But if you're just doing a curriculum that's like, hey, we're out here, we do media literacy, then you're like, oh, okay, well, I don't know which one is effective. I mean, they could just say that they are, and then maybe you'll believe it. But you have to also look into how is the instructional design, because teachers aren't taught how to be instructional designers. They're not taught how to design the curriculum, how to implement it, how to deliver it to students. So there are a lot of factors that you need to investigate to determine the effectiveness of the curriculum and the educational outcomes that result from said curriculum and said instruction.
So it's a holistic, this is Lindsey, a holistic approach that we would have to take. And yet I find myself coming back, wondering again and again, as we see other types of curriculum being removed from schools where we're trying to maybe combat misinformation, right? Making sure that we're not telling a single story. How are you in the newsroom, Amity and Angela, how are you dealing with that when you are, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, this is Amity. It's interesting. And Angela, I think this might be after you left King, or maybe you were still there. We were required to go through a training to identify false pictures, false narratives generated by AI. Because as soon as we post something that was generated by AI, we lose our credibility. And likely the FCC will come after us, which is not the case for any other real media source that you're starting to see on social media, but I'll get to that later. But I think it's interesting because as journalists, most newsrooms, it seems TAGNA has taken it very seriously to educate the journalists on how to identify certain things that might not be real or maybe AI generated or being generated from somewhere else. I think that is key in a newsroom. But I want to kind of go back to what Jared was talking about, what you mentioned as the holistic approach. I wonder if, and Jared, this one's to you, is there a possibility that something like that curriculum could be standardized?
This is Jared. Yes, absolutely. I think that this is extremely important. In precision teaching, we have this thing called the standard acceleration chart, which measures learning. That's a true measure of learning across time. And one of the things that we need to make sure is that are our learners learning? And we have to measure that. A lot of times people think that telling is teaching, but telling is not teaching. Simply because I told you something does not mean you know how to do it. So you have to actually engage in it for me to be able to determine if you're doing it correctly or incorrectly, and then give you feedback. The people that know this really well are actually in sports. Coaches know I can't just tell you how to shoot a basketball and then you're out there like Steph Curry. No, no, no. You're going to need reps. You know, you're going to need practice, and then you're going to need feedback not only from the coach, but from the ball going through the net, from the way that it feels leaving your fingers. You need all of that. All of that is part of the learning process. And then you need repeated reinforced practice to be able to make sure that you build that skill up to fluency, which is the fluid combination of accuracy plus speed, which characterizes competent performance. Because if I talk like this, it isn't fluent. It isn't at our normal speaking pace. But once I get to that certain level of fluency, then you'll be able to engage in conversation like we're doing now. So when we go and find the media literacy curriculum, we can't just be like, all right, we're going to use it. Let's go. We have to be like, no, let's test it. Let's practice it. Let's test it among a variety of individuals and see if across time they gain the educational outcomes it purports to provide.
Hmm. This is Lindsey. Angela, in your time at King and all of the journalistic endeavors that you've engaged in, how have you dealt with when, and I want to name my bias, my potential bias here, but how do you deal with when you're reporting the news, but you know what the person said is a lie?
Ooh. If I'm trying to think back to it, because most of the stuff that I did and say in the last 5 years where this really became an issue is, it's pre-recorded. So if I know the period for me, full stop, like if I know that someone's lying, I don't air it, or I will say that this is not true and fact check it right there. I think having the ability to be able to check something in real time is very important. And sadly, sometimes even that isn't enough in the age of social media and sound bites, where people can still, click the thing and there was way more to the story. But, I'm old school journalist. Like I was taught, like if you can't prove it, you can't use it. And if you get something wrong, it's an automatic F, period. So yeah, it's an immediate check, always. And and look, when you look at your sources, because I know a lot of people want tools for like, how do we get better at this? And I try to look at the ones that aren't afraid to give retractions when you messed up. Like if you got something wrong, if you have an organization that isn't afraid to come out and say, you know what, we got this wrong, here's what happened, I will trust that place more than the one that it's an ignoring of the full story.
Yeah, that's interesting. If I'm willing, this is Lindsey, if I'm willing to say I messed up, I'm more likely to be really thinking about trying to get it right.
I think, yes, that truth matters, facts matter, truth matters. I like the truth more than the fact because it puts it in context.
Yeah. This is Lindsey. So how, a lot of people just had a bunch of time at home with their family last week. They're about to go home. Maybe if you're in, the context of the United States and a Western paradigm, maybe you're preparing for some holidays at the end of this year again. And they're going home and they're having conversations where two parties are sharing news from their media source. And they feel very justified that they have the version of truth. How would you coach them in those moments?
This is Amity. Interesting that you mentioned that. I had a very similar experience this Thanksgiving season.
Oh, dish it, Amity.
My house, Lindsey, just calling me out.
No, I mean, I gotta be honest, it's polarizing out there right now, right? We've seen it with our loved ones, with our, I was raised in Los Angeles, okay? I was raised in a certain kind of way. And I noticed that certain people are just changing their views. And so here's the thing. If you can engage in an active discussion with someone and you can go, oh, that's interesting, or they're taking it back from you, or they're willing to engage, then there's a discussion. My hard time is that if someone starts giving you something like a conspiracy theory or going kind of way off the deep end, which can happen, I don't know how you communicate with that person other than to say, and I've tried. There's been times, Lindsey, I've been like, where'd you get that information? Where'd you get that information? And you know what? It goes nowhere, because at that point you're going to a different level where it's more in the mind, right? We're talking about the psyche in this moment of what can you really address with somebody who is having, issues, I've heard many times that conspiracy theories are something that people who fear loss of control are drawn to. So at that point, you kind of really start getting into a different level of psychology. But I think overall, when confronted with those things, the one thing I try to always do, and I think that we're gifted as journalists because we've had to have kind of sometimes a poker face or to listen and to open up, is just try to say, hey, listen, let's just have a conversation. Nobody has to be right now. We just need to talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And see, I do tend to like, this is where I'm going to be bad. I'm like, I would try to come up and find the right answer. So I would start probably digging around.
You're Googling.
But in all seriousness, I think being able to ask, I love the question that Amity said, and this is Angela speaking, what were your sources? Because one source is not enough in this day and age, sadly. So for me, it's never one source. If I'm ever trying to vet whether something is true, you can ask like, hey, where else did you find that information? How many sources did you look at? Different ones. I mean, that is like, if I had to give like one major tip, that is like a big one. Just have multiple sources on any given day, because I don't know if this is okay to go into, but when you think about any news organization, what they choose to cover is just as important as what they don't cover. And it's decided by probably 10 people in a room, and actually 2 people who are the bosses in the room. So imagine what gets left out, or imagine what gets included, depending on the bias that exists in that room. Now, the best journalists among us, we're going to be aware of our bias and try to do right by our listeners, viewers, consumers, all of the things. But in the wrong hands, what a powerful tool.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. This is Lindsey. Go ahead, Jared.
This is Jared. Thank you. That brings up such an important point that I want to really uplift, is that everybody has bias. Every source of information has bias. And to believe that you can provide information without a bias means that you are trying to divorce yourself from your past, from your history, from your learning history. And our learning history shapes our behavior. And without recognizing, like a lot of people in academia like to try to say, oh, I'm doing this research and I'm not affecting my research at all, and I am a blind participant. But that's not exactly how it works, because the reason you're doing this research is because you're interested in this research, because of the history that you've had with said research, or else you wouldn't be doing it. So when it comes to media, we need to understand that no matter where you're getting your media from, there is some kind of bias baked in. When you go to those multiple sources, you can reduce the amount of bias so that you can get closer to the truth that actually exists out in the real world. And then you can come up with your own decisions, opinions, and ideas that hopefully align with your values.
Oof, this is Lindsey. This is leading me to ask you all, put your existential hats on. We're warm now, right? We're ready. Like, is there truth?
Oof. This is Amity. I don't know why I'm jumping into this one first, because
I love that boldness, Amity, and Angela speaking.
I mean, I'll be clear, like I almost failed philosophy because it was hard. Wasn't it Robert Evans? He was a former movie producer that said there's three versions of the truth, or 3 versions of the truth. It's yours, mine, and the actual truth. So I don't know that you can really, I don't know. It's weird. It's almost like asking like what defines consciousness, right? I mean, it's a very existential question. But I do think that it does come down to kind of what Jared said, is it's that bias, right? So if you can't be unbiased, then there's no way you can get towards the truth. And I mean, and kind of hearkening back to what something Angela said about, you know, this powerful tool. So let's just talk about the truth of a newscast. Let's say overall you have this newscast, it's an hour long, and you try your best to do everything. You try to put, you know, stories about education, you try to put stories about finance and environment. You try to really balance this whole newscast out. And in our generation, that was very important. It's called stacking the show. And you do try to stack it equally and well done. And as I was an anchor and also kind of executive producer, I was early morning. I came in and I was looking through scripts, and the show was unevenly stacked. At the time, we had a president who said lots of things, and sometimes things that were people considered funny. And the producer I was with liked to run those stories a lot. And I realized that is not being truthful. That is mining out something that wouldn't to be any really benefit to the viewer, because that's really what it comes down to. What is the benefit to the viewer? Whether it's education or entertainment, like, are you benefiting someone? So I think that when it comes to truth, you really have to rely on those with the right ethics and who are going to be the people in the newsroom who can tell the truth. Now, what the truth is, I don't know.
I'd love to jump in on this one too. Oh, go ahead. Jared, did you want to go first?
No, you go first. I'll go after.
Okay. I was recently in Sedona, and I'll never forget looking at this one mountain, and it looked like it had one peak. And then when you drive to a different section of the area, you see that there were really three. So if you were on one side of the mountain, it looked like three, and on this side, it looked like one. And what we're asking journalists to do, responsible journalists to do, is go around the whole mountain, you know, when you report that story, right? And you have all these different perspectives. So I think there are different perspectives, but for many issues, there is a truth. I mean, there is a truth based on a bunch of facts that we then put in their proper context and space and time. And there are some, yes, there is truth that exists. It can be complicated sometimes because of the different perspectives, but yeah, that's what, I mean, at our best, I think that's what we're doing as journalists. We're going around the full mountain, offering the different perspectives and the facts from different places. And we're coming out with, that's my view being asked. I mean, this is a big question that I'd love to have more time to think about, but that's where I'm at today.
Yeah. Jared?
This is Jared. We're taught in behavior analysis or behavior science that there are 3 levels to understanding in science. There are description, prediction, and control. So can you describe it? Can you predict if it's going to happen? And then can you control whether or not it happens by manipulating variables in the environment? Then we've determined if it is actually true by making sure that seeing if it's repeatable. So once you control it once, that's cool, that's cool. But can someone else follow what you've done and then try to do the same thing to see if the same outcome occurs? So in science, that's kind of how we determine what is true or what the true value of any variable is in the environment, to really kind of mess with it. And it's interesting because when you watch kids develop and grow, they're like natural little scientists who are learning how to describe things. They're really interested in if they can control things that are really small. And then they sometimes try to predict if something will happen because they've seen it happen before. And then they're like so surprised if it violates their prediction. So we learn at a very young age these things, and it can help us get closer to the truth.
This is Lindsey.
Lindsey, let me just say this. I just want to amen what Jared said, closer to the truth, but kind of that realization that maybe it's not always this perfect destination, but we're always striving to be there as close to possible. I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. This is Lindsey. Jumping on what you all are talking about, do you think that there's the challenges? And so, Jared, I love this example of children, because even watching my own children, the thing about the experiment that I see is that still at a young age, they're willing to give up a notion. So when they find that their version of what they thought was true is now in question, they're willing to give up the notion, which I think, Amity, is a little bit what you were describing about when you find yourself in a conversation where you're debating versus arguing. In a debate, you're both prepared to give up the notion. In an argument, I'm going to stay strong to my version of what I came in with. I'm prepared to leave with. Is there something in that? Have we as a society begun to lose this ability to say, when I am confronted with new data, with new information, I am prepared to adjust, to pivot, to give up the belief that I had now that new data is presented?
This is Amity. I have to say, it's interesting that you say that, because I witnessed personally, I feel like across the country, this exact thing happening in real time a few years ago. The Black Lives Matter movement. This is a moment where a white person like myself was forced to look at some real hard truths. And like I said, I grew up in Los Angeles. I thought I understood. I thought I at that moment had to say, I had no idea. I am basically ignorant to all of these things. And that was a hard moment for a person to go, oh, it's embarrassing. It's shameful, because you're like, how have I not seen or asked my friends or done this? So it isn't an easy thing to do. But I think with talking with your friends, talking with you, Lindsey, really having that conversation, that it is possible. Because I personally saw, not just in my own life, but I saw other people change kind of who they are, change, my husband is one of them. And I thought, wow, this is a guy who was raised in Central California, and he was one of those people. So I do believe that it's possible, but we have to maybe show people that it's okay, I guess, in a way, or there's not really, it's better to feel that, and to feel that shame, and to not know, than to not at all, because the other side was like, nope. So that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I've been baffled by it, because I grew up in a small town in Pensacola, Florida, and I went to this evangelical Christian school for 10 years. And so I have friends that I grew up with. And so we're connected on social media, and I can totally accept like having different points of view about a candidate for a variety of reasons. What I could not accept is this disconnect from reality. For example, they kept saying that Kamala wasn't qualified. And I was really confused. I'm like, you can mention her policy differences. You can mention, I just don't like her personality. I mean, so many other things. But to choose unqualified is not in any way connected to reality when you look at the resume. And no matter how much you may like counter with whatever, I start to wonder, do you really know it's true when you just want to say that? Like I've been baffled by it. So to your question of people being able to change course when they get new information, I hope that's not a skill we as a society are losing. I have reinforced my kids over and over, and I try to model it, not just teaching our kids, but modeling it. You know what? Mom was wrong here. I apologize. You know what? You helped me change my mind on that. You offered a different perspective. God help us if we don't get better at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Jared. I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that what behavior science teaches us is the environment shapes your behavior. So a lot of the time when we hear people that don't seem to engage with what we recognize as reality, it's because their verbal community is spouting dis or misinformation about the qualifications of the candidate that is running for election, Kamala in this case. So when their entire verbal community is saying that and repeating that, and that thought gets reinforced in their belief system, then it becomes reality for them. So what I've learned, since we're all sharing where we're from, I'm from the Bay Area, California. Shout out to you, Amity, down there in LA or SoCal. But what I've learned being here in central Pennsylvania, where it is very different from where I grew up, the people here, their verbal community are all one. So it can feel like, since they may not go outside of their verbal community, their close-knit community, like 10, 20 miles out, that feels like the world to them. So the world in their case is saying that this candidate is unqualified. So then when this weird, strange news media or person from the outside comes in, it seems like they're in the minority. So when the world is so small, it seems like everybody is within us and everybody has this groupthink same idea. But really, once we escape and we go out and we communicate with others, we learn the difference and how vast the beliefs and understandings and ideas are across the nation and the greater world.
This is Lindsey. Shout out. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I know where you are, Jared. Yes. This is two questions coming up for me here. One, I'm really interested to know where the three of you consume your media. Like, what are the sources that you would recommend? One. And two, I think that there's this thing that I often find, especially when I'm with, as Martin Luther King Jr. referred to them, as well-meaning liberals, which, Dr. King reminded us we're going to be the ones that actually ruined everything, that they, and oh, look at this language. Oh, sorry, but they are also just as firm in their ideas of what is right, of what is true. And I had a class recently, and I love this man. I love this man. He was wearing a shirt that I felt clear he had chosen to make sure that I knew what he thought about this training. But about midway through it, he raised his hand and I called him up and I said, "What's on your mind?" And he said, "About 50% of what you said thus far, I did not understand." Right? And as a teacher, I try to make sure that I am as accessible as possible, but he was so kind and humble in giving me that offering of, even if I wanted to listen to what you're saying, Lens, I didn't understand 50% of it. And so my question is, in what way is that sometimes the fault of the well-meaning liberal, right? Like, we love to use our big, words from our big, blah, 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 and we think our education is so much better than others. And then we use our own bigoted language and often an accent to describe a community or a population that we think is the other and the problem. I'm sorry, it's just the three of you. I have 50 questions you want to get to while I have you here. But is any of this making sense? Like, in what way, when we talk about media literacy, and I think maybe going all the way back to Angela's question about education, in what way have we almost created a divide between the information and the access to it?
Well, I mean, Angela's speaking here. I mean, we get in our bubbles too. I mean, people, look, I'll never forget. I love that bias came up earlier, and I'm forgetting the name of the book, so please forgive me. But the researcher talks about one of the best things you can do to counter bias is to actually invite people into your life who are different than you, meaning have them for dinner, go hang out. And let's face it, a lot of people aren't feeling like doing that right now, depending on where you stand. But that's where it begins to happen, because then when you're trying to teach or share, how do you have to kind of know where people are coming from. And if you're just in your bubble, your echo chamber, it makes it really difficult to do that. But what do you all think?
Yeah.
This is Jared. The first question I believe was, where do you consume your media? And I just wanted to list a few things because I don't have cable. My parents do. And every time I go to the house, ever since Obama was elected the first time, it's been nonstop news. And we work to change that. Like, put on Independence Day. I know it's playing. But what I like to do is, since I was probably like for over 10 years now, I've been on YouTube watching Philip DeFranco on the Philip DeFranco show. Then I also watch Internet Today on there. Then I know that I've clearly started to like, because I watch a lot of TikToks, Hassan Piker, who is on Twitch. And then I also use Instagram and TikTok because before the information is put on whatever news station, it will be on Instagram or TikTok. And then, Angela, you had a really poignant thing that I wanted to hit, but I forgot. Can you say the
Was it
question?
bias related? It was about bias and
It was a little bit before that. Um,
She was talking about being in community with people with
oh,
different
yes.
ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you. You just triggered it. So a lot of what we think is like, oh, well, if I am kind and I reply to them and we have this conversation back and forth via comments on like an Instagram post, maybe I can change their mind, provide them with facts and information. One, it is highly unlikely that any paragraph is going to change a person's worldview. And two, you are in combat with their entire learning history, the entire history of reinforcement they've received for being a part of the communities which they belong to, which are significantly important to them. And then you're somebody that's trying to talk to them, even if it's online, if it's in person, you are always combating that. So I think what we need to do is what I do with my learners is meet them where they're at, communicate with them, and then it can be easy to get into the browbeating or the belittling, but I think that it's important that it's more educational, informative, and like, hey, I have more information if you're willing to engage with it. I'm not just trying to change your mind, but I'm trying to share with you what I've learned and what I know. And I think that that's a more generous way because I have this argument of who's better, LeBron or Michael Jordan, and we all know it's LeBron, the greatest for the longest. And the the old heads will not agree with me.
Oh, I know. We love this. We all loved you up until now, Jared.
A
Then all the old
90s
Yeah,
girl right here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, so but basically, it doesn't matter how many stats I show. It doesn't matter if I show him he has the most points, he got to the most points the quickest, and he has the most blah 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 blah. It does not matter. Your lived experience will tell you otherwise. So I think it's an important thing that I can't just come out and say that and then browbeat you and say, how could you possibly think that MJ is the GOAT? But I'd be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing right now. I didn't experience what you're seeing. So let's engage in an exchange of ideas and culture where I see where you're coming from with your MJ love, and let me understand why you love him so much. And then let me give you some of LeBron, and then we can at least both leave with learning what the other person's worldview, perspective, and environmental history have provided them.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah. This is Amity, and I'm not sure if I remember the first question now. Was it about
Where do you consume your news?
Okay, so yes, that I think is key. I actually just wrote Philip DeFranco down because I wasn't aware of that. And I am a little bit old school in the sense of where I go to the AP, because I can trust that typically it's pretty just straight wires, non-biased, just getting it out there. I go to the BBC to see what they say about the United
Mm,
States, 'cause it's interesting to have someone else's perspective of what's going on. I will go to every place really to kind of get an idea. If I'm doing my everyday morning thing, I'll just kind of skim through. But what I encourage people to do is to actually read everything. Go online. I mean, listen to a Joe Rogan podcast, okay? Go do and read everything out there so that when we do have these conversations, they can be conversations. And I just feel like what the media has done in the last, since the 2016 election, is that they have kind of created, like, all of a sudden networks are kind of choosing their political parties, which I never thought that I would live to see a day that happened, but it did happen. And not one stood back and said, okay, this is crazy, like, because it was money. It was all about money, and nobody wants to be brave enough to say, let's look at this for what it is. Because you had also mentioned, the good-hearted liberal that can be extreme. I mean, extremes on both sides are not good, right? So that's kind of the problem we're seeing, is that I think people feel that they can only be in one camp. And that's what I think we see a lot of, especially when there's nowhere to get news that doesn't piss you off, excuse me. But I could watch this and be annoyed by this and this and be annoyed. I just want to go to a news place where, like, maybe there's going to be two people there we're talking to and one pisses you off, but one doesn't. But you're hearing them be good models of behavior because they're having a discussion. So I think the problem overall is, where are people getting their information? Because honestly, I think the main news sources, barring, some of the top newspapers around the world who've done a really, really good job of trying to remain solid. But I think overall, where we went wrong is our cable news stations. They failed us. The people on the top there, they failed us.
Oh, this is Lindsey. You heard it here first. I'm so happy to hear you say that so clearly, because I think for many of us, we feel it, but we don't feel justified to necessarily have that opinion, right? But you have seen this kind of slow degradation and this or this slow movement towards this binary media storytelling. Wow, wow, wow. This is like, let me just ask, I'm interested to know, I think some of you know I lived in Australia for many years, and they just recently passed a ban for 16-year-olds and under and having access to social media. What's the path forward? Do you think it's something like this?
I am very skeptical of completely limiting social media because, one, just because you do it doesn't mean that they're not going to get around it. I mean, as a kid, they tried to ban all the game websites when I was going to computer class, but we found ways around them. Young people are very technical with that kind of stuff. Two, in America, we have a higher age of to be able to drink alcohol than pretty much everywhere else. And a lot of what you see here is binge drinking to a level that you don't really see anywhere else. So individuals learn how to drink responsibly earlier before individuals here. And there's also the culture of the college and everything in the red cups that they don't have in Australia. But I don't think banning it outright is the way to go, when what we could do is create an educational opportunity to teach people. And I'm seeing in the chat, England has a serious alcohol issue. Yes. But I think that it's an learning opportunity to teach people, because the social media is new. And there are problems with social media that aren't necessarily addressed, such as how images of women are highly doctored. So the women that are in the images on social media don't even look like that, which makes it so that young girls, young women see those bodies and have that ideal. And it happens the same for men too. And then they get they look at their own body, and then they have problems with it because it doesn't match these fake images, these highly doctored and even medically doctored images of bodies that they think are the ideal. What we need to do, in my opinion, is to teach individuals that this is happening, and that those body dysmorphic behaviors can actually occur in you. So we need to detect when they're occurring and then figure out ways to reduce the frequency and probability of said occurrence in the future, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Angela, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Angela speaking. I think it sounds great. The challenge is that they are addicted. And some would argue, based on certain documentaries, that it was designed that way. And Yeah, someone asked the question earlier about FCC guidelines and how much have they changed in the last 5 years. I don't have that specific answer, but what I can tell you based on just my gut reaction and kind of piggybacks into this situation is regulations and laws haven't kept pace with the development of technology and the transformation, period. So I highly doubt that the enforcements are there to adapt to some of these things. So I think, Jared, to your point, I think it's absolutely valid. I just worry that I guess I would say, I wonder if it's a better use to work on how we regulate what the kids are consuming. But for now, I'm like, keep them away from it. Their brains are still developing. And even though they sneak around, I'm going to keep trying.
This is Amity, and I would just want to say, even though I'm probably edited a photo or two of myself, I would like to see a ban on enhanced images and see what the world looks like then. Like, we probably have the technology. I think we do. To any image that's been enhanced, nope, it's out of there. I mean, that's kind of a dream. And I also think that it's hard because a lot of people don't love a whole lot of government oversight, and a lot of people have no problem with it. But I also think that there is an ability for that. Now, like you said, Angela, I didn't see someone's question about the FCC, but it is interesting because they haven't kept up with the times. And what always really burned my biscuits was when the investigations were going on in Washington about what Facebook knew about bullying and about the algorithm and how they were basically knowingly hurting children. That's where I was like, how is this happening? How is this allowed to, how we have this whole platform? When televisions were initially set up and we decided we were going to have these platforms to share news with the world, the FCC made sure that there were guardrails to protect. Now, again, not a whole lot of people love government oversight, but I do think in a society, you need to have some guardrails, or companies will not care about our children, will put whatever out there to entertain them and then harm them. Because I've also had this conversation with my kids. I'm like, no social media, like it's not happening. And they play games and they play the Roblox and they play these things. And we have extensive conversations about predators online. But my daughter, who is now becoming like a young woman, and it's happened overnight, I have to have these conversations with her. She actually made a bad comment about my body, guys. And I was like, stop a second, because it was what she sees. And I said, this is a woman's body. Okay. I had 2 kids. This is what it looks like, but you don't see that. And so we've had these conversations as much as we can. So it is in the parents' hands, but I also think that there's part of it that could be regulated a little bit better, especially with social media companies, where it's pretty much like the wild, wild west still.
Yes. This is Lindsey. You tell that child Auntie Lindsey will be over here.
I'm going to tell her.
Don't be talking about my girl. Just no, I will be there in a hot minute. Oh, I feel like we're just cracking the surface here. And there's so much that I want to understand. I know that people out there want to understand, but I'm also being told that we're at time and I need to wrap this up. I guess my final question, and I want to hear from each of you, is what is useful for us as we move forward, right? Like not what's wrong, not what's right, what's truth or not truth. And you introduce this language, Amity, as a society, right? This collective experiment that we choose to engage in. What is useful as it pertains to our media moving forward?
It's Angela speaking. I can start. I know, Amity, you've kind of launched us several times, so thank you for that. The first thing that comes to mind is realizing that we're in a soundbite society. Media organizations are trying to survive, newspapers trying to survive. We're trying to get people's attention. A lot of people getting news from social media. And that's great that you can access more viewpoints by scrolling. And so I think what's useful is to remember that whatever you scroll, whatever you click on, asking, okay, what was their source? So if there's something you want to know more about and you see an article on Instagram or TikTok, and then you can click and find out what was their source, and then look for maybe another media organization's take on that specific topic. I know we can't always read everything because we're so busy, but if that, I would say that's the one useful thing, is realizing that there is often way more. And if I can just provide one quick example, I'll never forget during the election cycle, there was a soundbite that was just heard around the world. I mean, it went around and like just so fast. It was when Vice President Kamala Harris was on The View, and she was asked about would she have done something different than Joe Biden. And so everyone heard that one soundbite that she's like, nothing comes to mind. And even I was like, oh my gosh, what a horrible answer, you know, that's a horrible answer. But then later, I actually listened to the full interview. And if you listen to the full interview, it actually wasn't as bad as that headline made it sound. And what I would say is that kind of stuff happens over and over and over. So if there's something you're deeply passionate about, you know, take those extra few minutes to find the source and read as many different perspectives as possible on that topic.
Wow. Wow. Yes. Jared?
This is Amity. I'll go. Jared and I were like, do you want to go? I'm actually going to come back to that like psyche I was kind of telling you about. Something that I find helpful in myself and in sharing with other people is that if you read something and you have a really powerful reaction to it and you're really angry, what I do and I tell others to do is just take a minute and think about like, why does that make me so mad right now? Is it something in my life that is affecting me personally? Is it something, is it, maybe a man who can't get a job for whatever reason, and he sees this headline that says, more jobs will be available for a certain group of people, and he gets angry about that. And then look at why, and what are you doing to work within these things? And I think that when you do look at a particular story and realize it bothers you, just explore that a little bit. And then if it doesn't resolve, then keep reading about it. And then, form an opinion, but just be sure of where that is coming from, because that's going to help you out a whole lot more than, kind of going on and on about how something angers you.
Mm.
I love that. Self-reflection.
Yes, thank you.
Start with the I word.
Oh, yeah. This is Jared. I want to just say, Angela, what you said about making sure that information about whatever is being talked about on the post can be easily accessible would be so helpful, because even just doing the Google search, it can be really difficult. And no one wants to go out of the app to something else. If they can just click a button, it's easier. And then Amity, when you really sit with and look at, why do I think this? Let me investigate my own feelings, my own values, and see if it actually aligns with these things that I'm being told. I think that both of those are really important. I think that also one thing that I would like to see is that the information that's supposed to be educational be more entertaining. One of the best ways that are examples is Bill Nye. Like, he is like the one for, my generation above and below. Everybody loves Bill Nye. Like, Bill, as soon as he comes in the room,
That's
because
science
it's fun.
guy.
Exactly. But also he was telling, and telling isn't teaching. So we need to make sure that individuals are able to actually do or engage in the behavior, so that we can determine whether or not they've done it correctly, or if they need a little help to get closer to the correct form of the behavior. So we need to make sure that all of these things that are supposed to be educational, informational, have an ability so that the learner can actually engage in the behavior and get feedback on whether or not what they did was correct. Because a lot of times when you might read something or see it and want to try to do it, and you don't exactly know, is that model that I looked at exactly what my behavior looks like? Or is where's the gap? How do I get closer? So making sure that you know that telling isn't teaching. So we need some feedback to see if the behavior is correct. That's really important as well.
Mm. Mm. Yes. Which
And,
we
and
all learn. Oh, go ahead, Angela.
Oh, can I just thank you so much for that, Jared. And I was just going to say, Amity's point about being able to reflect on why something made me angry It made me reflect on the unqualified post and why that bothered me. And it was because if I look at my own life, those things have come up. I saw it with my dad, all related to discrimination. You know, you didn't have this degree, or you get this one and the rules change, moving the goalpost. All things as an African American, there's a history of in my family. So that little piece of reflection, I think, helps you maybe, I don't know, frame it a little bit better. I think so I thought it was great advice. So thank you. Used immediately.
Yes. Yes. This is Lindsey. What an amazing offering, Amity, Angela, Jared, today. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody who is here to hold space for this conversation. We hope, as Jared is giving us this invitation, that you take it out, you work to not just receive, but also apply, share back with us your insights, your failings. I will also be sharing mine, and let the practice grow and grow and grow and be the difference we want to see in the world. We are fresh off our first live recording that happened at Town Hall in November. We are going to be back in February, once again, live at Town Hall. So we hope to see you all there. I'm going to take a long break at the end of December and January. I love you, but I love you more after I haven't seen you for a while. So, you know, go get kidnapped, come back with stories to tell me. Have a very, very, very peaceful and healing and restful return to the light, which is the winter equinox. And we will see you in the new year. Goodbye.